Hi, my name is Karina Akido. I'm the managing editor of Canadian Auto Dealer. I'm here with Trevor Tamke from MNP, who's going to kind of discuss in more detail the federal wage subsidy that came out. So, Trevor, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it and tell us how dealers qualify for it.
Sure, thanks a lot for having me. So over the last week, since the legislation was released last weekend, we've been pouring through it just to really familiarize ourselves with how this is going to play out for many businesses. So the first thing you want to look at in order to determine whether or not you qualify is for the month of March 2020, did you have a 15% reduction in your revenue? For April and May, it becomes a 30% reduction test. Now, you do have a choice as to whether or not you want to compare. So, for example, if you're comparing March 2020 to March of 2019, and April to April, and so on, so you can make the choice to compare that way, or you can also elect to compare to the average of January and February of 2020. So, for example, if you were a new company and didn't have revenues going back to March of 2019, that would be an alternative way of showing that you achieved the required reduction in revenue. So once that revenue test is met, then you're sort of in the program. And so then you're into doing a calculation for each of your employees. So the starting point is determining what's called their baseline remuneration, and so that's remuneration that was earned from January 1st to March 14th of 2020. And then for remuneration starting March 15th of 2020, the wage subsidy, or the CEWS as we would call it, would then apply up to the maximum of $847 per week per employee. So in some circumstances, you may end up actually the calculation can work out to you getting a subsidy of 100% of the amount that's paid. So it can range between 75% of what you've paid, or the $847 per week, or like I said, in some cases you can get 100% of what you paid back. It all depends on what that baseline calculation works out to, and what you end up paying them. Also important to note that for owner managers may be paying themselves a wage on a regular basis, and so if you're an owner manager that's been taking regular wages throughout the January to March time period, you then could continue to pay yourself a wage, and your wage would also be part of this program as well. One other thing that they brought in with the legislation was a potential refund of the employer portion of CPP and EI premiums that were paid. Now, the important thing with that is you need to have an employee that is on leave with pay. So an employee that's really not performing any work for the business. So if you have an employee that is on leave and not performing any work, the employer would be eligible for a refund of the CPP and EI premiums that were paid.
Right. Now, one thing that comes to mind is, how do we factor in commission-based salespeople?
So yeah, common question with our dealership clients. Now, commissions paid are included in eligible remuneration, and so commission employees really, in that sense, are treated not any differently than any other employee that you have. So any commissions paid to that employee would also be eligible for the wage subsidy. The one thing that could get a little bit tricky with commissioned employees is determining for what period the commission was earned. So for example, you could have a situation where you might pay a commission at the end of March, but then the determination would be, when was that commission earned? Was it earned in the pre-March 15th period? If it was, then that should be included in the employee's baseline remuneration and not eligible for the wage subsidy. So that's the biggest thing, I think, with commission employees, is just allocating, when those commissions were earned.
Now, I know that there were other additional details released about the program. Are you able to provide any more information or insights on the additional details, specifically to what dealers need to know?
Sure. So often, we're not just looking at a standalone dealership. We may be looking at a group of dealerships. And so if you're a part of an affiliated group of companies, you can prepare the revenue calculation on a consolidated basis, which is nice. So if the required reduction, so again, the 15%, for example, for March, if that required reduction is met on a consolidated basis, then each member of the group will qualify under the CEWS program. So you could, for example, have a situation where you have a standalone company. If you were to look at it individually, it wouldn't meet the criteria for the program. But if you combine the entire group and look at it on a consolidated basis, you meet the criteria, and so you would then be eligible, or each company in the group would be eligible for the program. It is important to make sure you take a close look at the definition of affiliated in the Income Tax Act, because that's how you determine what companies you need to group together. Another important thing is that all related party revenue has to be excluded from the calculation. So often, if you're part of a group of dealerships, you may have inter-dealership transactions or sales, and so those need to be backed out from the calculation to determine whether or not you've met that revenue reduction test. Another example, often we'll see, you'll have a management company, and that company will employ a lot of the administrative or executive staff. And so it's normally in that situation, its revenue is going to consist mostly of fees paid to it by the individual dealerships. And so of course, if they're related, then you would have to back out those revenues. So often you would find with a management company like that, it wouldn't otherwise qualify for the program. Now, fortunately, with the legislation, they provided for an alternative calculation where the management company would be entitled to take a look at the revenue reductions for each of the individual dealerships in determining whether it meets the criteria. So that becomes a bit more of a complicated calculation. But it is possible for a company like that to qualify. Another important thing was they brought in some flexibility in that if you qualify for one period, you will automatically qualify for the next period. And so, for example, if you were to meet the 15% revenue reduction test for March, you wouldn't need to re-qualify for the program for April. So if you met the test for March, you're automatically in for April as well. Now you would have to go back and recalculate for May to see if you meet the criteria for May. But it's nice that once you've met the criteria, you're qualified for at least the immediately subsequent month. One other important thing that that people should be aware of is that our understanding is that this application for the program will take place through your My Business account with CRA. So not everyone has gone and set that account up. So it is important if you want to apply for this program that you do get that account set up as soon as possible. What will happen is there will be a little bit of a delay in the setup of the account because CRA will mail you out your login information. And so to get access to these funds as soon as you possibly can, you want to have that account set up with CRA.
Great. So a lot of work, but a lot of benefits out of that. Is there any more information, or do you have any advice, in fact, that you'd like to offer the dealers in Canada?
Just that this legislation is complicated, and these calculations can be complex. So it is important to reach out to your advisors who are familiar with the legislation to help you through this. Obviously, you want to be eligible for as much benefit as you possibly can while following the guidelines that the government has set out. So like I said, it's just important to reach out to to your advisor who's familiar with the legislation.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview. Really great information, really important information for dealers to know. So with that, I would say I wish you and your family good health and safety during this very difficult time. And if there's any more updates, I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again.